is an absolutely beautiful day here on the coast of Southern California, and I am in the genesis of Honda as we know it. This is not Honda's first car, but it is the first one that kind of matters. This is a 1975 Honda Civic with the CVCC engine. And this is kind of the mainstream birth of Honda. So this car was generously loaned to me for the day by the kind folks at the American Honda Collection Hall. It's free to access, and there they have a beautiful collection of cars that you can check out 5 days a week in Torrance, California. Everything from very early cars like the N600 and the S600, all the way up to modern concept cars that never even got made. It's really cool and definitely worth a stop, and it's free. It's a cool way to spend an afternoon if you are in Torrance. Right now we're talking about the past, and this is where Honda begins. Your parents have probably never heard of the Honda N600 or the Z or the Honda S600, but everyone knows the Honda Civic. And that's because in the 70s, it was the right car at the right time. So this car is no joke, 50 years old just about. It is 49 years old. So we're gonna hit the road in a 49-year-old compact car, and I'm gonna talk about what made this car so special and why it's so different from every other 1970s car you will drive. Firstly, it's how it starts, because it actually works. That seems simple to us today, but back in the 70s, it was not that simple. If you had a British car or even some American cars, they could be a pain in the butt to get going. But in the Honda, it was famous for its reliability, and we'll talk about some more Honda traits as we get on the road. I keep having to remind myself that this car is 50 years old. You know, this exact car is 49 years old, but this design debuted in 1973. So it is a 50-year-old car pretty much. And 1975 is a big year for the Civic because that's when they got the CVCC engine, which stands for Compound Vortex Combustion Control. Basically, back in the days, in the early to mid 70s, they knew pollution was a problem, but nobody knew what to do about it. They had never thought about making an engine run cleaner, so it was kind of this big mystery, and no one really knew what to do. The first Band-Aid fix was slapping catalytic converters on regular cars, but back in the day, catalytic converters were expensive, and they affected drivability, and they took horsepower out of the car, and it really wasn't a great deal. Soichiro Honda, which is Mr. Honda, thought there had to be a better way. And what he came up with was the CVCC system. So what he came up with is essentially an engine that has 3 valves. It has an intake and an exhaust, like you would in any other engine, and it has a third, much smaller valve, and this valve's entire job was to feed air into a pre-chamber for combustion. Basically, fuel combusts in the combustion chamber, and it gets expelled through the exhaust. The problem was that in the 70s, they hadn't quite figured out how to burn all the fuel in the combustion chamber. And the fuel you don't burn comes out the tailpipe as pollution. That's not good. So the CVCC, the idea was that if you ignite a small little teacup of a pre-chamber combustion chamber, then that literal fire will catch the rest of the air-fuel mixture on fire, combusting it much more thoroughly than if you only had one chamber. And basically today we call that pre-chamber ignition, and that is used in diesels, but also in the Maserati MC20 sports car. So it is still a practice we use today, but it was pioneered right here in the Honda Civic. The other cool thing is that by using this technology, Hondas did not have to use catalytic converters. This lowered the price, and it helped them maintain power. Now the stats here is that this car weighs about 1,700 pounds, and its 1.5 liter 4-cylinder engine makes about 52 horsepower. And it's not a rocket ship, but it's not bad. Here at 40 miles an hour, put your foot in it, that's 50. That's not bad. Like, this is not the fastest car I've driven, but it is the fastest 50 horsepower car I've ever driven. And beyond that, I can't believe of all the 50-year-old cars I've driven, this drives so beautifully well. The steering is so tight. It doesn't wander on the road. It's manual steering, by the way. The shifter is easy to use. it really feels like a car 10 years newer. My personal car, the 1974 Ford Maverick, only 1 year off from this, that drives like a car from the 1960s. You drive this car back to back with the Maverick, it's unbelievable that you could even compare the two. Compare this to a Beetle? Get out of here. It's no surprise that this was a runaway sales success for Honda, and in my opinion, this and the 240Z were the very first modern cars. They set the tone from what cars were going to be like for the next 25 years. What else can I tell you? The ride is surprisingly good for having such a teeny tiny little wheelbase. We're on 12-inch rims right now. That is it. And we need to pull over to fill up with gas. Even though it gets 40 miles to the gallon, we still need to put gas in it so we can continue this review. So we will pick this up after a quick fuel stop. All right, we've got a fresh half tank of fuel. Time to take this thing back to the museum. Tight confines, like this very scenic gas station, really remind you how teeny tiny this car is, because even though it's very small, in a positive way, it doesn't drive small. It doesn't drive like a toy. It just drives like a nice small car. It's crazy to me how similar this drives to like an 80s Honda Civic, considering this is an early 70s car in terms of design. So we don't have a tachometer. We have these little marks on the speedometer that kind of show us our shift points. Now this is a pretty rev-happy engine. It would rev to about 6 grand, which is pretty high for a not performance engine of the era. But driving it it's just so easy. Usually driving old cars requires a learning curve. You have to kind of figure out how they work, because it's not like a new car where you hop in and go. But if you can drive stick, this really drives just like a normal car. I mean, it doesn't, without the power maybe, but the shifter's intuitive. I mean, my goodness, the visibility is amazing. And this car, I can't stress enough, was a smash hit for Honda. It was by far their best-selling car to date. There were some problems back in the day. Notably, these were, even for the standards of the 1970s, horrifically rust-prone vehicles. They rotted out so terribly often. They were the subject of like a class action lawsuit and an NHTSA safety bulletin for rust issues. In fact, this actual car has a sticker on the door jamb saying it participated in the recall and inspection of these cars, because apparently they were rusting out, the front fenders were rusting out within 3 years of them being sold new. You know, they did get better and improve that over time, but it was definitely a weak spot in these cars, and it's why there's not a lot of these cute little Honda Civics left around, because they were so good as cars that they just got used until they dissolved. But, you know, probably while the motors were still working. Thankfully, at the American Honda Collection Hall, they maintain this car and a fleet of about 60 others, of which roughly half are ready to go at a moment's notice. They actually do maintain and use these cars, which I think is so cool. And it's so much cooler than a static museum, because it's one thing to look at historic cars and, you know, appreciate them, but I'm glad that Honda is doing the work to get these cars out there, getting them seen by people, and letting people like me experience what they're like to drive. But I would say my main takeaway is just how natural and easy this car is to drive, and how it's not very toy-like. You know, you would think a car this old and this small. This is a 1.5 liter engine from the 50 years ago, and it has no problem at all with modern traffic. You know, the steering wheel is really big for a car of this type. You know, that's a big thing. And it's manual, so when you park it, you kind of feel it, but it's a 1,700 pound car. You don't need that much assist. There's a reason these cars were so popular for so long. So the first gen Honda Civic was made for model years 1973 to 1978, or maybe 79, I don't recall which. But they made them in that range, and during that time they sold hundreds of thousands of these cars. The second gen model was featured in Pulp Fiction, which I always thought was kind of a fun trip. But Basically, these are an interesting period in Honda design. You have this kind of set back dashboard. It's got wood grain on it. The gauges are interesting. They're blue background with white text. A lot of these design traits would quickly go away as Honda, went headlong into the 80s. You'd get a lot of grays, a lot of more kind of tech-forward looks. But this is kind of interesting that they were still kind of finding their design language. Give it the beans. Keep up with traffic. I'm to the floor. Don't you think it still sounds like a Honda engine? I think it's funny that like all these Hondas from 50 years ago, they still sound, like that famous Honda noise. The other weird thing, this is not a hatchback. There was a hatchback model, but this cheaper car is not. This is the base model, which has a weird opening trunk thing, like a Mini, like just the bottom half opens. And the rest of it stays put. The glass stays put. There's an optional hatchback model which opens the way you think, but that was more money. And in case you're wondering how much money, I'll put the actual 1970s price up here on the screen, because I can't remember it off my head. But if you adjust for inflation, the car I'm driving in today's money was like $12,000. Like, these were so cheap. And add to that the fact that these got a legit 40 miles to the gallon in real driving. Like, this is a 40 mile per gallon car from the 70s, at a time when most American cars couldn't hit 20. All right, you ready for the handling? We're gonna throw it into this turn doing a reckless 40 miles an hour. Oh yeah. Lightweight, front wheel drive, rack and pinion steering. It handles really well. There's also like really fun cost cutting tricks, like they have 3 horn buttons here, 1, 2, 3 on the spokes of the steering wheel. The funny part for me is that all the horn logos are painted the same direction. They just installed it at different parts of the wheel. So the right one's right side up, the left one's upside down, and the bottom one is sideways. Why make 3 buttons when you can just make 1? The wheel spins anyways. But this was the Honda that brought the company to people's actual lives. Because before this car, Honda was a nerd brand for people that were either ruthlessly cheap or a bit quirky, to be honest. But their previous efforts really in America were the S600, which they barely sold, the N600, which is the air-cooled 2-cylinder economy car, and the Honda Z-Act, which was again an air-cooled 2-cylinder car. None of those were really, real products for the American market by the standards of the time. They were novelty cars, really. Where the Civic had 4 water-cooled cylinders and could be driven on the freeways. This is a legit 70, 80 mile an hour car. And that made it actually usable to people that weren't super nerds. Now, I love the early Hondas. I would love a chance to drive one. But they weren't mass market products. And this was Honda's first go. And it's really cool to see how right they got it for such an early effort. But, driving this car home at the museum, I just can't express enough how modern and easy this car is to actually drive and live with. Now, this car runs and drives absolutely beautifully, and it does so because of the hard work of the people at the American Honda Collection Hall. Now, they're a small but dedicated team that keeps that fleet of 60 vehicles organized and maintained and available for lucky ham-fisted journalists as myself to drive. I think it's one thing to learn about the history of a car company, but it is so special to be able to drive cars from their early history and experience where the brands that we know today, where they really came from. And people at the American Honda Collection Hall, they keep that dream tangible. They make it a real experience that we can have. But it's really their hard work that keeps these cars looking absolutely mint. And if you are in the area of Torrance, California, during the week, you should definitely stop by and just glance around at the Honda history. It is really cool to see it all in one place. In fact, they have like one of every cool Honda and Acura product that you can think of. So, if you think that there's a classic Honda video that we should make next, let us know in the comments, and I'll send them a very nice email telling them the people demand more classic Honda content. Frankly, this is a car I could live with every day and the normal commute, even 50 years later. This is a car you can drive every day if you can keep the metal on it. So for Driving.ca, I'm Clayton Seams, and for more classic car content, don't forget to read our full article on this car on Driving.ca and follow us on social media. And a special thanks to the fine people at the American Honda Collection Hall for making this all possible.